Welcome, Wargamers, to Build Me an Army Worthy of Numenor. In front of you, you are looking at my Numenorian army. I have taken these guys to a couple of events now. I took them to the Grand Tournament last year, this year of 2019, and I've also used them as the buy army at the Strider Cup. Now, Numenor does not have a great deal of options to it, but it can be quite a fun army to use. It's got 3 different heroes and 1 warrior type. We're going to go in the video, we're going to go through each of these and have a little bit of a talk about the things that they're good at and maybe some of the things they're not so good at. Potentially also as well how you might go about building or putting together a force of them yourself and what allies they have available to them. So starting off, we have got their king, Elendil, one of the few people to have fought Sauron face to face. He is pretty good. He has got a really good stat line. High fight value, high strength, high defense, and he's got 3s in a lot of the right places in terms of his attacks, his wounds, might, will, he's got it all. The only bits he kind of gets let down on are in regard to his fate, where he only has 1 of those. So he is very susceptible to falling if you're up against things like Morgul Blades or anything that can potentially deal all of your wounds in 1 hit, such as the King of the Dead. On the plus side though, he carries the Sword of Narsil, which gives him a free heroic combat every turn, and he has got a good selection of special heroics that he can use as well. Not to mention that his Standfast is twice the range of most heroes in the game, and the fact that he has got Fortify Spirit on him at all times, which makes him a lot harder to deal with magic casters and makes him very good at keeping a defense up for things like Nature's Wrath and that kind of stuff. He also has an ability that gives nearby Warriors of Arnor resistance to magic, as does Isildur, and he will get +1 to his courage as well, which basically gives him the highest courage that you can have in the game. So yeah, overall he's a really good hero. He weighs in quite heavily in terms of his points cost, and that again is the only other thing that really kind of holds him back, is that he is very expensive to put into your army. But if you haven't had a chance to use him, definitely do so. The fact that he can heroic combat all over the place is just so much fun to do. In terms of his options, it's definitely worth giving him a horse. Once he's on horseback, he gets all those extra attacks at that high strength, and of course, being able to heroic combat. It's just a winning combination, really. I don't think I would ever use him without taking him mounted. Odds are he does get shot off his horse from time to time. It's just the nature of the game that if you have strong heroes, people will try and dismount them. The only other option that he has available to him is the option to take a shield. Now, I've elected not to give him a shield. Now, some people might think that's because of one of the special things about his sword, which is that if you use it two-handed, he gets the two-handed weapon bonus without the penalty. So you can get your +1s to wounds without any kind of effect on his ability to win the duel. I actually still think it's worth giving him the shield anyway, even if you elect not to use it for the entirety of the game. There's 2 reasons for that. The first is, as the most expensive and potentially most dangerous model in your army, people are going to try and shoot him. And just having that extra point of defense sometimes is going to come in handy, even if you stop using it once you get into combat. The other thing is that he might sometimes find that he's been dismounted, is surrounded by enemies, and has a lesser hero heroic striking up on him. In that case, sometimes it's actually better to have that ability to shield, double your attacks up to 6, and just rely on winning that fight and buy him some time for the next turn where maybe he can start using his sword again. So I definitely think it's worth giving him a shield. The reason that I haven't done so is that I just think the model's gorgeous, and I don't really think there's a lot of places I can put a shield on that model without kind of ruining how it looks. He doesn't carry one in the films either, but he does have the option for one in the game. So I guess my thing is definitely use one if you can, if you want to. You can probably slap a shield to his back, but I'm really happy with the way that he looks just with the cloak, so for me, I'm probably not going to have the option to use a shield unless I go ahead and build an entire new Elendil model. I guess there's space that you could shove the shield on along the side one of his legs or something for the mounted model. This is my conversion of him, by the way, I should have mentioned. This is not a standard Citadel figure, this is converted from Aragorn King Elisar. So that was a fairly straightforward conversion to do with a few more complicated bits on it, but if you want to see more about that, there is a separate video on the channel outlining how I've done the conversions for this army. So give that a little look if you want to. Anyway, moving on. Next up we have got Isildur, who again has the option for a horse, and there's very few circumstances where I wouldn't take one. Part of the reasons for that is that there is no other cavalry option in this army aside from the Elendil and the captain of Numenor, and it's sometimes very important to just have that ability to be a little bit faster, to have someone on horseback, not least because it gives them a little bit of extra defence against archery, and obviously means that if they hit once charging on horseback, they are likely to do a lot more damage. So Isildur here is pretty much painted to a very basic standard. The army's not quite finished. I do want to go back and put a lot more highlights and things on them, but as is typical for me, the time of the tournament came up and I just didn't have a lot of time left to finish them off, so I kind of got them to playable standard and then planned to go back and do more with them. Isildur doesn't have as much in the way of special rules as Elendil. He will still make your nearby troops resistant to magic. But overall he has got a slightly lower fight value, same high strength, which is good, same high defence. He doesn't have any special abilities on his sword aside from the fact he can use it two-handed. It's definitely worth giving him the shield option because there's no negatives to having one really. It just increases his defence and won't really get in the way unless for one particular reason you want to go two-handed in the fight. He's got 3 attacks and 3 wounds, same as Elendil. Where he's a little bit stronger is that he's got 2 points of fate for the cost of a will point, so he's a little bit more susceptible to being hit by magic. Of course, he gets resistance to magic as well if you keep him near Elendil, but that extra fate point does come in handy, and he is a lot cheaper. So of the two, I would say that Elendil, whilst a really great strong hero, I kind of feel at the moment that he is maybe the hero you go to when you're playing at high points. I certainly wouldn't think he'd be too strong in armies of less than 600, maybe even less than 700. I'm still kind of getting the gauge on when exactly the good time to use him is at. Unless maybe you're going all hero. All heroes are a little bit of a different ball game. But for overall, if for a pure Numenor army, I think I'd be taking Elendil in a high points game and Isildur in a lower one, just because he's a little bit more flexible. And of course, if you take Elendil away, Isildur has the ability to use the ring. I mean, the ring can be huge because of its effects on enemies when you're fighting them in combats and lowering their stats, but it also makes him invisible as well. So I guess that is another occasion where maybe I wouldn't take the horse, but maybe just Isildur on foot. It really depends what you've got in mind for how to use him and how you're thinking about using that ring in combat. So, those are the main big heroes. Next up we have the captain of Numenor. Overall, it's pretty much the same as any captain you can get in any old army. Has exactly the same stats, +1, as is common to most heroic captains when you take them. The only exception is that he counts as the same strength as Warriors of Numenor, whereas other captains tend to go 1 point higher. I've certainly found that this doesn't relegate him to this role exactly. He's still very good at hitting enemy troops due to his high fight value, but I'm less worried about using him as a model that's going to hit enemies, again because the other 2 heroes in this list have a lot more combat potential in terms of their attacks and their strength. For him, I tend to find he tends to arrive and be my last couple of might points on the board. He is definitely a commander kind of role and giving me those extra heroic marches or heroic moves, sometimes late game, when maybe the other two heroes have spent their might in various fights and strikes and that kind of thing. Definitely worth including one in any Numenor army, in my opinion, because he is the only model that will provide this list with Heroic March, and that is a very crucial thing to have. Options-wise, the standard sort of selection: bow, shield, heavy armour, can also be mounted with a lance. I do have that conversion in the works, but it's not just quite finished yet. Just haven't managed to find the motivation to get around to finishing it. Definitely worth doing though, and it will definitely happen and be included in my future armies if I get around to it, because again, it's just useful having that extra punch when you're mounted on horseback, and he's the only model in this army that can have the lance. Captains with lances can be something of a bit of an outsider, as in people don't tend to recognise the threat that they can provide, and then when they get hit in combat with them, they kind of realise, oh, it's high strength plus the extra lance damage as well. So definitely worth having a look if you've got the chance. Again, no official model. This is just a basic metal spearman converted to be carrying a sword, and then I've gone ahead and painted the shield gold, so it's even more obvious that this is the captain model. Wouldn't leave home without one. Just having the ability to have an extra couple of points of might with Heroic March is just too valuable to miss. So that takes us on to the one warrior option this list provides. That's Warriors of Numenor with shields. This guy has got a converted Warhorn from the Lamroth kit, but he is just a shieldman at this point. It's not an option that Arnold could take. I just thought it'd be fun to include in Elendil's warband. All the standard Numenorians spearmen come with shields and spears, which is quite handy because it puts their defence up to 5, which is fairly crucial because it's quite low otherwise. And of course they have the option for regular bows. Overall, I think this is kind of how you're going to see most Numenor armies, because this is the only option that the models come with if you don't convert them. So shield and spear, shields on your front rank, and bows. I've taken a full third of my warriors with bow in this list. This is mostly because having archery, regardless of which army you're using, is usually quite important. I do know that some players tend to go the other way. They just go, well, I'm just going to focus on combat troops and not worry too much about having bows. I'm just going to, have elite combat specialists, and so that does work for some people, but I've always found that having the bows gives you some extra options sometimes when you need to maybe force the enemy to come to you. Maybe you're up against a bow heavy list and you need to have something doing damage to them on the way in, and not just relying on all your troops surviving what they're throwing at you. It's subjective. The only way to find out is to get some practice in and decide which way is for you. It is worth stating that even though these guys have bows, don't be afraid to throw them into combat. They are strength 4 just like the other guys. You may as well get them into combat once the lines clash, because that's where they're going to do damage. When I've used them, they've sometimes got the odd lucky hit off. Sometimes they've been up against a sort of medium level bow army and they've managed to fight that shooting war. But overall, sooner or later, they end up in combat with the rest of the army, because you just need the numbers there. It is worth pointing out that they are somewhat expensive for a troop. They're quite close to elves in their points cost, and some people view this as a bit of a negative. I think you kind of get a lot out of them anyway. They're the same stat line as Numenor Scouts and have very similar abilities in that they're going to hit hard but not necessarily be able to be hit too hard back. Their defense is the same as most Rohan models of Rohan warriors. It's just a case of remembering that you're going to have to be more offensive than defensive with them sometimes. One exception to that is the fact that so many of them can carry shields without conversions. So having that ability to double up on your attacks with a quite high fight value can keep you in a game longer and can keep your warriors alive for much longer. Definitely one of the ways that I use this force is to try and hit hard, say with the classic shields backed up by spears or bows backed up by spears, depending on what strength your enemy is. But if you are struggling to match the enemy's numbers because you just don't have as many men as they do, you've got to start using shields on your frontline troops to just even keep them alive that little bit longer, giving your big heroes more time to impact and to do what they do best. Overall, the interaction tends to be you want Elendil chewing through troops, you want Isildur hitting troops or enemy heroes. The only reason I say Elendil on troops more than heroes is that enemy heroes that Elendil needs to deal with will tend to heroic strike against him, and that prevents you doing heroic combat. To really get the most out of Elendil, you need to be using his heroic combats, looking for gaps in the line, looking to try and cleave through as many enemy warriors early on to equal up that fact that you've taken an elite army and you might not have as many men. Elendil, if he's not the leader as well, is more expendable, and he's got heroic strikes, so it makes him more suited for hunting enemy heroes and trying to cause them problems, whilst leaving Elendil free to take out people he can easily outclass and cut his way through. And again, as I mentioned, this is why my captain tends to have to worry less about actually engaging enemy heroes or warriors at all. And don't get me wrong, he's great against enemy warriors, but sometimes he's just valuable for heroic moves, leaving the other guys to spend their might where it's needed most. I think that pretty much covers the most of the points. One thing I have neglected to say is Numenorian banner. Find a way to convert one up, and always take one. You've got a really high fight value. You might as well have the advantages of using it to the most, and having a banner will really help you with that. Sit it central behind your lines and just keep defending. If I was going to potentially expand this army further, I would seriously be considering taking a second banner. Just because it kind of gives you that extra safeguard along the lines. It does make the army even more elite, obviously, but I think it's worth it. I very rarely these days ever think of leaving with any army that has the option for a banner and not taking one, because just those rerolls are so valuable sometimes to be able to win a game, or and the difference between winning or losing it. Overall, the warriors themselves, as I said, they're like Urukai scouts, so they hit hard, and they have, unfortunately, just a slightly lower defense than what's considered standard for some of the stronger troops these days. Their courage is pretty good. Their courage is pretty good with their army bonus, which gives them +1 to it. But as standard is pretty low. Well, it's lowish. It's not quite as bad as goblins are. But yeah, having the +1 to it really helps. If they actually get round to adding another option, I really hope they consider adding a warhorn, because that will make their courage really strong and just mean that they become a very reliable army. Overall, when I take a list, again, there's not very many options, so it's essentially the 3 heroes and as many troops as you can take with a banner, maybe 2 if you've got the ability to convert them. I again think that Elendil, he's great, but sometimes he's just a little bit pricey to be able to include in every list. Whereas I think you're going to see Isildur far more often, especially in a low point game without Elendil, because of that ring, and the fact that including Elendil means you no longer have the ring, for obvious reasons. He only gets it after taking on Sauron and Elendil dies. Another thing worth mentioning, although this isn't something that I have playtested myself, what I mean is used at an event or played that much or practiced with, is taking them as all hero. Elendil is again quite expensive, but he brings a lot to an all hero army. Likewise, Isildur is quite lean for what he can provide, and having that ring just means that, in an all-hero army, that could be quite a valuable tool. I've definitely seen people team him up with Gil-galad, for example. On that note, allies. Unfortunately, that's my broken Glorfindel. That blade on that model is notorious for breaking, but thankfully I do have the weapon somewhere, so one day I will get round to fixing him. High Elves are the only green ally that you can have with Numenor, so there are potentially other allies out there, but they'll either cause you to lose your bonus or to become an impossible alliance. Elves are a really great ally, because whilst they're also high cost and elite, they can do a lot to help you out. Just having basic elves as spear supporting your basic warriors gives you a higher fight advantage. If you include Gil-galad and upgrade them to Kingsguard, they get even higher on terms of fight value. The only real negative is that they have a slightly lower strength, so your ability to kill things might drop slightly, but that should be compensated by the fact that you're winning more fights. The other thing as well is that the Rivendell list provides quite a lot of really good support heroes. I have seen people use Círdan as a potential ally. The reason for this is he's relatively low points cost for most Elven heroes out there. It doesn't cost that much more than the captain, and he provides 3 really good spells. The whole range of Blinding Light, Terrifying Aura, as well as Enchanting Blades. All pretty damn good things. And Aura of Command as well, if you find yourself up against Harbinger of Evil or Suffering on the Courage Test front. Another point worth noting is that Círdan was at the Battle of the Last Alliance, so if you are going for that kind of ally, it is historical. Although, to be honest, if I ever try that out myself, I might try and convert him up so he's wearing heavy armour. Just for the look. He can't take any option for it in the game, but I just think it looks a little bit different. Then, of course, you've got the big heroes. This is Glorfindel, obviously. You've got Elrond, who is a great choice if you want to add some cavalry to this army. I'm an advocate of cavalry should be in just about every army. Having cavalry support just is so crucial sometimes, I find. Feel free to disagree, maybe you're a solid infantryman. But the only way to have any real cavalry element in this force, aside from mounted heroes, is to ally in Rivendell Knights. And to do that without having a limit on them, you basically need to take Elrond. The only other way to do that is to take a lot of elves, and by that point you've probably spent half of your points just on elves, and thus the armies become the Last Alliance, elves and Numenor, not just Numenor as its central focus. It's the High Elves do provide them with a lot more options, and I think that's really what the crux of this army is. It's the fact that they have so few options. Because they only have one warrior type and no cavalry, that's really the only thing limiting them, in my opinion. They've certainly played quite well when I've used them, but they do tend to struggle to win games just to being that little bit elite, and I always feel kind of like I just need a few warriors on horseback to help me out and to provide that extra punch once my lines engage. They did okay at the Grand Tournament. They had one game that they pretty much got wiped out, one game that they won comfortably, and one game there where it was really touch and go, and then they just kind of lost it on the last few turns. Again, certainly a lot more for me to learn in terms of how to use the army overall, but yeah, it brings a pretty good mix of abilities to the field. I don't really think that you can go wrong once you've started painting up the models, because there is only really a couple of ways to build this list. It's either pure Numenor, trying to play to their strengths, which is hitting hard and trying not to rely on surviving a punch, but maybe fending it off with shielding warriors if you're finding you're outnumbered in a particular place, and then just letting your heroes loose on the enemy to do as much damage as they can. The other way to build it is to try and pick a mix of High Elves and Numenor warriors. It is worth noting that if you leave Elendil out of that alliance and just take Isildur, he will be able to use the ring, even with people like Gil-galad. I've seen people do it. I know why they do it. It's strong. Personally, I wouldn't use Isildur with the ring in the same army as Gil-galad because, again, it's the same reason that you can't take it with Elendil. He wouldn't have carried it by that point. But, hey, it's an option in the game if that's the way you're so inclined. Beyond that, yeah, it really comes... There's so many heroes in the High Elf list, and it really just comes down to which ones do you feel provide the thing that Numenor can't do. Elrond gives you that little bit of extra magic and cavalry access. Glorfindel is just a combat machine, as is Gil-galad. And then... all of the support heroes like Círdan and etc. They, provide their own little benefits. So it's all. We'll possibly talk a bit more about that if I ever get around to doing the build me an army worthy of Rivendell, or maybe that will be Chris who ends up doing that. Anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed a quick sort of look over the Numenor army list. If you've happened to already have a Numenor army and you've given it a go and have anything to add, please put it down in the comments below. I certainly am going to be taking this army to some more events, partly because I'm not sure how well you can see it on camera, but I am quite pleased with how they've come out in painting. Yeah, they look pretty, but have yet to really win a great deal of games. So maybe sometimes that's the matchup, but also I think sometimes they're just a bit limited in what options they have. But definitely, if you've not tried one and you have the models lying around, certainly the swordsmen are quite cheap, so are easy enough to add to your Rivendell list. Give them a go and let me know what you think. Remember to give this video a like if you've enjoyed watching it, and definitely subscribe if you are interested in watching more videos like this, or for videos that are centred around some of the narrative campaigns, as that's an area that we're looking at trying to do a bit more of. We do have some conversion videos of how to make your own Numenor accessories, like having banners, mounted Elendil, that kind of stuff as well, up on the channel. Give those a look if that's the kind of thing that you're looking to do. And yeah, remember always to enjoy watching, and to do your best to support the Hobbit hobby. Have fun, guys, and we will hopefully catch you again.